In this week's parasha, in Parashat Tetzaveh, we learn about the big day kahuna, the garments of the Kohanim that the Kohanim would wear in order to do their service in the Mishkan, ultimately in the Beis Hamikdash as well. And there are 8 different garments that could be worn, usually all 8 by the Kohen Gadol, unless it's Yom Kippur, in which he's going to wear 4. And throughout the rest of the year, the other Kohanim would wear 4 of them. And they're listed in the beginning of the parasha, and the parasha tells us, V'asista big day kodesh, la'aron achicha l'chavodo tifaret. And just a pasuk later, it says also, V'asuet big day Aaron l'kadsho l'chahanoli. These begadim, these garments are intended to make sure that the Kohanim are able to serve in the Mishkan. And the way we understand certain mitzvot, at least in the eyes of the Monei HaMitzvot, those who count the mitzvot, usually up to 613 mitzvot, is often an interesting study in understanding exactly what the mitzvah is, who's required by that mitzvah to do it, and how do we typically understand where that mitzvah is situated in understanding of all of the halachot and the mitzvot in the Torah. And along those lines, while we know that the Rambam, for example, in his Sefer HaMitzvot count mitzvah aseh and mitzvah lo taseh, he has positive mitzvot and negative mitzvot. In the case of Rav Sadia Gaon, the Sefer HaMitzvot of Rav Sadia Gaon, he has 3 different categories. He has positive and negative, as the Rambam, and he also has a category called Parshiot Tzibor. He has 65 mitzvot that are commanded upon the community. They're not individual mitzvot that are on individual people. They are generally a mitzvah on the community to ensure that exists. And in the case of the Shmona Begadim, Hashmona Begadim L'Tifaret, is the 62nd of the mitzvot that Rav Sadia Gaon incorporates into this Parshiot Tzibor. And what essentially is being communicated by Rav Sadia Gaon, again, he writes in very, very shorthand. Rav Perla explains that ultimately what's happening here is that the mitzvah is on the community to make sure that there is in existence a wardrobe of begadim that the Kohanim could pull from, that they could use when they go into the service. It's not actually a mitzvah on the Kohanim to wear the begadim. The mitzvah is not incumbent upon the Kohanim to actually wear the begadim. The mitzvah is on the community to ensure the begadim exist. And along those lines, the Gemara in Zvachim and Daf Yud Zayin Beis says, "Bizman shebigdeim aleim kunasim aleim, ein bigdeim aleim ein kunasim aleim." Of course, the Kohanim need to wear the begadim. They can't do the avoda without wearing the begadim. There are a whole bunch of prerequisites in order to make sure that the begadim that the avoda could be done. But says Rav Sadia Gaon, is a mitzvah to create the begadim. It's not a mitzvah to wear them. That is a prerequisite for the avoda itself. It is part of the mitzvah of doing the avoda, but it's not a separate mitzvah to wear the begadim. The Rambam, on the other hand, writes in mitzvahs aseh lam gimel, in the 33rd mitzvah, in this positive mitzvah, the Rambam writes, excuse me, Lios HaKohanim lovshim ba'avoda big day kahuna. And Shanei Amar ba'asita big day kodesh, from our parasha, what the mitzvah is that the Kohanim should wear the begadim for the avoda. The Rambam also writes, though, in Hilchos Klei HaMikdash, in Perek Yud Halacha Daled, mitzvahs aseh la'asot begadim, to make the begadim elu, these 8 begadim le'yod kohen oved b'hem, and then the kohen should be doing the service in them. So he does incorporate the terminology of making the begadim. Obviously, making the begadim is critical in order to make sure that the mitzvah is done correctly. You can't wear begadim that you haven't made yet. But and again, all the details and nuances in our parsha show us the elaborate nature of how these begadim were made and all the different elements to them. It's worthwhile to emphasize, even if you've kind of learned this before and you've seen the pictures, etc. It's worthwhile to continue to go over and over to make sure that we have an understanding and a deep understanding of exactly what was taking place and what the amazing kind of sight was to see the avoda taking place, to see the begadim on the Kohanim. But according to the Rambam, the mitzvah is to wear the begadim. It's not a mitzvah to make them. That would be a hechsher mitzvah. Just like, for example, building a sukkah may not be a mitzvah in and of itself. It would be a hechsher mitzvah to sit in the sukkah on sukkahs. Same thing by here. Right? According to the Rambam, it's about the Kohanim wearing them, and making them is simply a hechsher. The Ramban asks a question on the Rambam and says, I don't understand. If you're so focused on wearing the begadim, unlike the Bahag who he quotes and says, the Bahag holds that the mitzvah is a mitzvah lo taseh, right? Different than the Rav Sadia Gaon that held there was a community obligation. Different than the Rambam held there was an individual obligation, mitzvah aseh, on the Kohanim to wear these begadim. According to the Bahag, it's a mitzvah lo taseh to not do the avoda without begadim on. right? That it's a negative commandment. Don't do the avoda without the begadim on. This is required in order for the avoda to be done correctly. Not a prerequisite for avoda, but it is an element of the avoda, and it is a negative commandment. It says the Ramban, if your focus is that they actually should just wear the begadim, count 3 different mitzvot. We pointed out earlier, there are 8 begadim, and they were worn in different ways by different Kohanim. The Kohen Gadol would wear 8 begadim on a typical basis, 4 on Yom Kippur, but throughout the rest of the year, 8 begadim, and the regular Kohanim would wear 4 begadim. Count all 3 of those as separate mitzvot. If it's all about the action of putting on begadim, so then putting on 3 different types of begadim, 3 different wardrobes, so to speak, require 3 different mitzvos. And the Brisker Rav explains in the Chiddushei Agriz on Zvachim, where we quoted earlier, that the Rambam is saying, no, the Big Kahuna is a mitzvah as a preparation for the avoda, za'achana for the avoda. Just because the avoda of Yom Kippur looks differently, the avoda of a regular day looks differently than a regular Kohen doing avoda, all 3 of those are not different, separate individual mitzvahs of wearing begadim. The avoda is, the mitzvah is, put on begadim that allow you to do the avoda. And so for one person, for a Kohen Gadol, it might look one way on most of the year. It might look differently on Yom Kippur, and it might look differently for a regular Kohen throughout the rest of the year. But that doesn't mean that they're 3 totally different mitzvot. The Brisker Rav explains that according to the Ramban, it's clear that he felt that no, that the action, at least his understanding, the Ramban's understanding of the Rambam, is that wearing the Big Kahuna would be a separate mitzvah from doing the avodah. That simply putting on the begadim in and of itself, where his question emanates from, is the idea that the fact that I'm putting on these begadim, of course you should count 3 different mitzvahs, because if you're going to say it's a mitzvah of putting on the begadim in each of these cases would be different, given that, again, the actual wearing of the begadim is significant. The Ramban goes on to talk about how the Rambam, comparing this case to standing, for example, during the avodah, and whether we count that as a separate mitzvah. But it's worthwhile to emphasize, at least for our avodas Hashem, we're not in the Mishkan, we're not putting on specific clothing that is necessary in order to do the avodah. But it's worthwhile for us to examine within our own avodas Hashem, what are the prerequisites when it comes to the avodah. Yes, it's true, we have 3 totally different categories here, whether it's a mitzvah lo saseh, like the Bahag, whether like Rav Sandya Gaon, it's a mitzvah on the community to make the begadim, whether it's like the Rambam, who holds that it's a mitzvah on each Kohen to wear the begadim, at least according to the Brisker Rav, each Kohen to wear the begadim that is necessary for their avodah. But in our own lives, when we're doing avodas Hashem, when we're serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu in all the different areas of our lives, we're not necessarily, wearing these begadim, we're not serving in the Mishkan, but we can ask ourselves, what are those prerequisites? What are the elements that are essential for avodas Hashem? What are the prerequisites in order to make sure that avodas Hashem is successful? What are the things like the clothing or the standing? Again, it doesn't have to be clothing and standing, but you kind of elaborate into our own lives. Which elements of our lives are critical in making sure that our avodas Hashem is up to par and is growing and is succeeding? Which elements are essential? And it's worthwhile every now and then to do an assessment of these elements of avodas Hashem. How is our davening going is a broad question, but what are the elements of our davening that are going well? What are the elements that are not going well? And what are the elements that are necessary prerequisites in order to make sure that the truth is, these are the things I need to make sure my tefillah are good. Do I have a calm mind before I go into davening? Did I make a list of the things that I really wanted to daven for, that I wanted to pray, about? Did I want to focus on? Did I give myself a surrounding in which, am I in a shul, or am I in an office, down the hall? Are there elements that ensure that our avodas Hashem is more successful, is more significant and effective? Those are the type of questions that I think come out of this type of discussion. Again, yes, fascinating discussion on how to count mitzvos, but for us, in our own avodas Hashem on a day-to-day basis, worthwhile for us to examine where are those prerequisites, what are the elements that are essential in our avodas Hashem, and how do we ensure that we're setting ourselves up for success, not only assessing whether we were successful, but setting ourselves up with all of the other elements around our avodas Hashem, ensuring that those are not only contributing, but ensuring that our success is done correctly and that our avodas Hashem is successful. Have a wonderful Shabbos.